Welcome to the Storycraft Cafe. Come in, grab a cup of your favorite beverage, and get ready to join the storytelling conversation. Storycraft Cafe is brought to you by Dabble, the ultimate cloud-based fiction writing software. Here we're going to bring together storytellers from all walks to encourage and empower you to craft your best story. Thanks for joining us again here in the Storycraft Cafe. We've got an amazing show for you today with Brad Thor, author of 22 books in the Scott Harvath series. We have a wide-ranging discussion, and if you are a writer, you definitely want to take notes on this episode. Join us over at storycraft.cafe so that you can be notified of upcoming events and live author hangouts that we have all throughout the week. Storycraft.cafe. Thank you to Dabble, as always, for making this podcast possible. Now on to our show with Brad. And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner. Today, one of my all-time favorite guys to get to hang out with, Brad Thor. What can you say? This is Harvath book 22. Just dropped a couple of days ago. Deadfall is the name of the book. You did it again, Brad. I don't know how you keep doing it, but you did it again. Welcome back to the show.
I'm touched. Thank you, and thanks for having me back, Hank.
Oh, you're so welcome. 22 books in a series. That one is quite the feat, quite an accomplishment. But you have managed to do something that I think a lot of writers hope to do, wish they could do, and that is create a series with so many entry points. You know, if a reader discovered you today, they could start with Deadfall. Have a fantastic experience with the book. There are other things that they could glean from the character and some of the supporting characters, you know, if they go back and read, and it enhances the experience, but it in no way breaks the experience if they don't read them in order. Is that something that you have done on purpose throughout the series? Did you intend for there to be so many entry points for readers?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was on the advice of my editor. You know, she didn't want somebody to go to the store and say, well, they've got this in the bookstore, but I need to start here. And so I can't read out of order. The best way to phrase it is I tell people that my novels are like the James Bond movies. You don't need to have ever seen a James Bond movie to go to your local theater and see the latest one. So that is the idea. Now, you'll get purists that want to go back and start at the beginning, and that's fine, but it's designed so that you could, if you haven't read a Brad Thor thriller before, I want you to jump in with Deadfall, and hopefully I'll win you over and you'll want to go back and read the other ones. But yeah, I mean, it's a brand new book, and I want everybody to read the brand new book.
Yeah. Is there shade and color that people will pick up by going back and reading the previous works? Are there things that they'll take from those stories that eventually will enhance their experience, or is it purposefully like James Bond?
Yeah, well, it's not. I mean, Harvath has held a lot of different positions over his career, kind of going out and chasing bad guys. So you may get that, but you get the essence of Harvath every single book. You know what drives him, how he got to where he is, and that kind of a thing. So I make sure that you're not missing anything. And it's hard for me to say as the author that you'd be any better off having read the other ones first. But I do have a lot of readers that are purists and want to start at the beginning. And then I've got other people that are like, no, that's what I love about the books. I can start anywhere. So it really is a personal preference thing. And what I like in what I do, Hank, I own a big amusement park. I am the Walt Disney of the thriller world. And every year I am opening a new ride. That's the new book, you know, and you may be a log flume guy and you still love the log flume that I opened 5 years ago. And that's your favorite. You love the new roller coaster, but man, that log flume is always going to be your favorite. And that's like having kids. I mean, imagine having 22 kids, you know, I'm sure you'd have a couple you weren't, you read once and they're good kids. You love them. They're your kids. I mean, I don't have any favorites in this. So
yeah.
Every year, I'm trying to raise the bar and get better as an author. And as you and I have discussed before, I don't work for Simon & Schuster. I work for you. I work for the readers. Those are the people that keep me employed. So when they go to Goodreads or Amazon and leave their those 5 stars, that's my annual performance review. And I want to get those 5 stars and I want to earn those 5 stars. And I think that's why I've got 23 books overall because I did a spinoff series one year with the Athena Project. So it's practically unheard of to still have that many books in print as well, that the books are selling well enough that your publisher keeps them in the marketplace. So I'm very fortunate to have the career that I do. And that's only made possible by my wonderful employers, the readers.
Yeah. Well, since you brought up the subject of being an entertainer of sorts and working for your customer, the reader, we've talked about this before, the fact that you are here for the reader. What happens though when you have a book like Deadfall, where there are some dicey subjects, shall we say, where the public is not 100% sold on a particular worldview? And I think you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I got you. I can finish it for you if you want me to finish the question. But I mean,
so what happens when you bump up against those tough topics?
All right. So just to flesh it out for the viewer, the listener to this podcast, this book, Deadfall, an American citizen has disappeared behind enemy lines in Ukraine. This is a woman who was doing some charitable good works in the country, decided to risk being there. She knew the risks and she disappears. The United States does not know if she is alive or dead. They're worried that she's been taken hostage by a rogue unit of the Wagner Group, the real life Russian mercenary organization. And the United States can't commit troops because then Russia will say we're at war with the United States. And so my protagonist, Scott Harvath, who they can deny any knowledge of, gets sent over and they say, find this woman and kill everyone responsible for taking her, whether she's alive or dead. We want her back and we want you to kill everybody responsible. So what I did in the book is, listen, just as an added table setter, I grew up reading these great World War II thrillers. I loved Alistair MacLean. Where Eagles Dare is a great book. It's a great movie with Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood. I loved all that kind of stuff. And I always wanted Harvath to have one of those World War II style adventures. But Harvath lives in 2023. I can't send him back in time to go to World War II. But when Russia invaded Ukraine, all of these bells started going off in my head. Now, what's interesting is in real life, at the end of the Soviet Union, when it collapsed, a third of their nuclear arsenal was in Ukraine. This is real life. Yeah. And we freaked out in the United States. The United States government was worried that either a rogue nation or some sort of bad actor like a terrorist organization might be able to steal these nuclear weapons and use them against us, like light one off in Houston or Miami or New York or San Francisco, Chicago. We didn't want that to happen. And so we went to the Ukrainians and we said, listen, we want to help you dismantle all these nukes. We've got experts, professionals that help you take them apart, and we'll take them off your hands and we'll make sure that they are properly dealt with. And Ukraine said to us, we will only do it if you can guarantee that by giving up our nuclear weapons, we will never lose an inch of sovereign territory. And we said, okay. And a memorandum was created called the Budapest Memorandum. And we signed it. And the Ukrainians said, now go get the Russians to sign it. Now, this is 1990s. This is pre-Vladimir Putin, and the Russians signed it. So fast forward to 2014, Putin invades Ukraine and slices off the eastern part, the Donbass, and takes the Crimean Peninsula. And this is very similar to what happened in the run-up to World War II, where Hitler went into the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, used the same excuse Putin did. I'm just protecting, for Hitler, ethnic Germans. And that's what Hitler said. And Putin said ethnic Russians, Russian-speaking people. It was the same excuse. And in the run-up to World War II, fascist Italy, the Republic of France, and the United Kingdom, via Neville Chamberlain, peace in our time, he was waving this paper around, let Hitler do it. We on the other hand, did a very similar thing, which is we let Putin do it in Ukraine. And there were some consequences. He got kicked out of what was then the G8. We now have a G7 because the members kicked Putin out for that. There were a few sanctions and a harshly worded letter from the Obama administration. That was it. And just like Hitler didn't have his thirst for conquest slaked by being handed a slice of Czechoslovakia, Putin didn't have his thirst for conquest quenched by being handed a slice of Ukraine. So when I look at this as an American, I think we ought to honor our obligations. So I get it. There are people that don't want us involved in Ukraine. There are other people that think we should. We made a promise to the Ukrainians and we did not live up to it in 2014. And I don't think any nation should invade another nation. Like, I'm from Chicago. I live in Nashville now, but I'm from Chicago. It's one of the most corrupt cities in the United States. If a Republican mayor was elected tomorrow, there hasn't been one in over 100 years, there'd still be corruption in Chicago. Ukraine has corruption. There's no question. They were they were part of the Soviet Union forever. That corruption is in their DNA the way it is in Chicago. But I don't want somebody coming down from Canada and stealing Chicago and saying because it's corrupt, they're allowed to take it. But I understand the different points of view, right? So my job is to entertain you. I'm not trying to change your mind. You can feel however you want. And so to get round back to your question, Hank, what I did is I put in different characters with different points of view on what we should or shouldn't be doing in Ukraine. And I didn't take a position. I let these characters say, well, this is why we should be involved. This is why we shouldn't be involved. So I tried to strike a fair and even balance for the readers, because at the end of the day, I want you to have a great white knuckle thrill ride. This, for me, is not a book about Ukraine. This is me being able to put Harvath into my own version of Saving Private Ryan meets Band of Brothers, meets Fury with Brad Pitt, meets The Monuments Men with George Clooney and John Goodman. Right. That's what I'm doing with this book.
So with a topic that is such a current hot button issue, and we all are familiar with how the book process goes. You know, you for months write the book, and then you go into edits, and then the machinery of publishing gets involved, and it's months more down the road before the book gets published and then, you know, gets out to the public. When you take a stance on, or not a stance, but when you use a current event that is so of the moment, is there fear that this is all going to be resolved before the writing of the book happens? And, you know, how do you kind of weigh out whether to step into those waters or not?
So it's good. I never wrote about bin Laden because I knew bin Laden would eventually be killed or captured. There was no way it wasn't going to happen. So I didn't want to put him in a book and then have the book be basically like, well, you know how this ends kind of a thing. Bin Laden's going to be dead. So I never wrote about him. I'm creating a fictional world. So I set it against the Ukrainian war, but I wanted it to be a war story that would stand the test of time. One of my favorite nonfiction books is by Eric Larson, and it's In the Garden of Beasts. And it's all about how no American citizen wanted to be the U.S. ambassador to Germany. But they found this professor from the University of Chicago who was really this pie-eyed idealist who had no idea what he was getting into. I mean, this guy was clueless, and he took the job because nobody else wanted it. And he went over, moved to Berlin. And it's a fascinating book about how the war was unfolding, how reporters were not reporting on what the Nazis were doing. American reporters were kind of sugarcoating things, and the real story wasn't getting back to the citizens in the United States. And it started getting worse. And you see this ambassador, his eyes started opening, not wider and wider, but he started to be less naive and started to realize what was going on. I know how World War II ends, but it was such a great story. It was such a great take on a slice of this. And it was recreated from his diary entries and letters and first person accounts and that kind of a thing. I think if you write a great story, it'll stand the test of time. And that's what I feel I've done in Deadfall, that this is going to remain a great story long after the Ukrainian war is over. You know, my biggest fear was something nuclear happening. in real life. That remains a big fear of mine, just because I think it would be devastating for that region. My professional fear in the book is that would throw the whole story, whether it was one of the power plants melting down, or, being shelled, or the electricity being cut off and they aren't able to cool the reactor, down to a tactical battlefield nuke being lit up somewhere in Ukraine. That didn't happen, thank goodness. I don't ever want to see that happen. But you're right, that was playing in the back of my mind. How does the book stand if something like that happens? But I feel the way I've done it, throwing Harvath into the thick of battle in these interesting villages and things like that in Ukraine, I think you could read this book 10 or 15 years from now and still have a great, really exciting thrill ride.
Yeah. One of the first conversations we ever had, Brad, you told me this story, and please correct me if I don't get the details right, but you were on your honeymoon with your wife and you had a conversation about things that you did not want to regret. You didn't want to be on your deathbed. What
was the one thing I would regret on my deathbed never having done?
And you wanted to write a novel and publish it. And you made good on, and through that conversation, it kind of changed the trajectory of your life for obvious reasons. 22 books in now. I think you've are able to check that off the bucket list. Has that conversation with your wife changed?
It's a good question. You know what? We have not talked about that. We're about to send our youngest off to college in a few weeks, and then we're going to be empty nesters. And
empty nesting is amazing, by the way.
Is that you speak out of experience? I take it.
Speak out of experience.
Listen, I'm excited about doing it. I don't know who I'm going to crack my dad jokes to. That's probably one of the sadder parts of this. Is I won't have an audience.
You need to find a young man that you can mentor, a young father.
Crack dad jokes too. Yes. Okay. Well, that's what I will set out to do that. Part of the reason I became an author was, let me back up. I love international travel. It is one of my favorite things. I was a travel show host before I became an author. Traveled a ton with my wife before we had kids, and we never seemed to be able to work the summer schedules for the kids to have them out of the house, other than sleepovers at friends' houses. My wife was not a send the kids to sleepaway camp kind of a parent, and I was cool with that. It's fine. But now they're going to be gone, and what's great for me is that as long as I have my laptop, I can be anywhere in the world. Yeah. So I can go back to Greece where I lived before. I could go to Paris where I've lived before and went to school, and I can write from there. So I am kind of excited about this next chapter of my life and how it'll be reflected in my writing. What will it be like if I can take my laptop with me finally and go for more than just a short vacation, go and actually park myself someplace for a month or two. So we have not had a conversation about anything changing other than the venue changing, if you will. So we're going to see what happens.
Love it. Speaking of that travel show, I ran across some clips from your old travel show, like on YouTube or something a while back. And I think what some people might be surprised by when they know the books that you write and, the kind of venue that you operate in was how much fun and levity you injected into those segments of that travel show. And I think that shows in the books that you write. Some people might, think of these geopolitical thrillers and, think that they're all serious, but there's a lot of fun. There's a lot of levity in your books. They're not just practical jokes and knee slappers, but you do find a way to kind of inject your sparkle-eyed view of the world into your writing. Is that something that you do on purpose? Is that just part of your bubbly personality that infuses in your writing?
You know what? Listen, I am a Sonny Reagan optimist. I always have been. And a lot of the guys, men and women that I know that are out there doing some of the the nation's most dangerous business, have a certain graveyard humor to them. You need it to survive. You're seeing the worst of mankind when you're out there, dealing with the enemy and things like this. So a certain sense of humor is necessary. I think it's good to inject a little levity on occasion. You don't want to turn it into a caper novel, right, but there is a certain amount of lightheartedness that does play out in the field where appropriate. Obviously not in the middle of gunfights and things like that. In Denfall, I have a running joke about javelins, like constantly people trying to get their hands on javelin missiles. And it is a recurrent thing in there. Everybody wants javelins. Right. And it sounds a little bit weird out of context now, but when you read Deadfall, you'll get it. And you'll be like, okay, yeah, I see what he means about the javelins. So I think it's part of what makes the character of Scott Harvath attractive, in that he can be intense and serious when he needs to be. And then he also has a lighthearted side. I think that makes him a well-rounded character, makes him interesting. It makes him interesting for me. And I think in the natural ebb and flow of a story, it can't just all be really, really heavy, dagger in the heart kind of stuff. I think an appropriate amount of a sense of humor, appropriate amount of levity here and there is good, but this is where you're the chef, right? You have to decide what seasoning the food needs at what stage. So you can overdo the cumin, you can overdo the red chili flakes. So that's part of the art here is figuring out where and when and how much of any ingredient to put in a novel. Whoops.
Yeah. You are famously a pantser in your writing style. That might surprise people who think of your books as very well plotted, and that there's constant twists and turns, and you must plan these out in advance. A friend of mine tells me he is a hardcore outliner, and he tells me all the time, because I'm not so much. He says, well, the fact is that everyone is an outliner. It's just, are you going to outline before you write, or are you going to outline after you write, where then you take the jumbled mess that you've come up with and fit it into some sort of plan?
He's wrong. He's maybe a lovely man, but I think he's wrong, to be honest with you. So ITW, the International Thriller Writers, just had a post on Instagram I saw like in the last 24, 48 hours. And I forget who the author was. And he talked about, he was a pantser. And so they just had this post, and he was talking about outlining versus not outlining. And he said something that really rang true with me. And no offense to outliners, he said, but you really don't know what the story is going to be when you outline. And you're kind of confining yourself to an outline versus letting the story lead the way. And I could make arguments pro and con against that, but I don't have a jumbled mess at the end. The story, I always tell people, I want to have the experience, Hank, of writing it that you have reading it. I want my heart to pound. I want my palms to sweat. I want to leave my office at the end of the day not knowing what's going to happen next. That can be really hard. It isn't hard at the end of the day when you leave the office. It's hard the next morning when you come back in and you don't know how you've painted that one particular character into a corner and you don't know how they're going to get out. So I don't sit down knowing what the full story is going to be or where it's going to go. Robert Frost once said, no surprise in the writer, no surprise in the reader. Right. No tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, no joy in the writer, no joy in the reader. So Frost really believed that you kind of had to go along with the story and see how it developed. Someone else once said that when you're a writer, you're creating order out of chaos. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with being an outliner. That's fine. Being a pantser is hard. I tried outlining one year. My buddy Dan Brown shared the outline for Da Vinci Code with me. I think you and I talked about that at one point.
We have, yeah.
Yeah, and I wrote a whole outline, and it took all the fun, all the excitement, all the mystery out of the novel for me, and I couldn't write the book. So it's two schools of people, and again, not to denigrate your friend at all. Sure, yeah. I think it's
I ridicule him all the time. Don't worry.
Okay. So I don't end up with a jumbled mess at the end where I have to outline at the end. That's just not the way it goes. It's an organic process that I liken to composing music. as far as I know, musicians don't sit down and outline a song. Maybe they do. I've known some musicians, they may make notes. They may have the idea for a melody, but you sit there and you play and you play and you play. The songwriters that I know here in Nashville is that they play until okay, that sounds right. And now, it'd be good right after this. That'd be good. So are they outlining in real time? Well, they're composing. And that's how I see writing a novel. It's like, this makes sense here. And I keep track as I go. All right. So I do a Word document and I have it in landscape format, and it's basically like a table. So I have what happened in this chapter, the chapter number, what time of day, what location it's in. And as I write things, I drop it into this table so that I can come in and say, all right, wow, we spent 4 chapters with Harvath yesterday. And, it's probably good that I bounce back over to the bad guy at this point and then come back to Harvath, sort of a thing. So I track my progress, if you will, just so I know, all right, it's probably good to switch over to this now. But that's about as organized as it gets, is me looking backwards. Where have I been up to this point? Okay, now it's time to go into this. And then it's like, okay, well, where did I leave the bad guy last time? What's he wrestling with? And where do I pick it up? But it's a very, very, organic process for me.
I'm sure that someone that's listening is thinking, does Brad really have no idea of the ultimate resolution of the story?
No idea.
No idea whatsoever. It's not like you have a destination in mind, but you're figuring out how to get there. You really have.
That'd ruin it for me, Hank. That'd ruin the surprise. I don't want the punchline until the very, very end. I know some people say, and I plan my last chapter first, and it's like, wow. Okay. So then you are forcing the story to go to your last chapter. Instead of following the story, you are forcing it towards that. Great. If that works for you, great. Again, everybody's process is different, and it's not my job to force my process on anybody else. But if I did that, then I'd be forcing the story towards that point, as opposed to letting the story develop organically. And I get to a point and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really cool place to end it. So that's kind of, there's that one piece of advice out there that I think is great, which is, if you're looking for the next thing as you're writing, think of the 4 things that would probably happen at that moment and throw those out, so that you keep, so you're constantly surprising the reader and that kind of a thing. That works a lot. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't work, but again, I'm an organic guy. If it's organic, don't panic.
I love that idea that the thing that is obvious, remove that from the table so that you can't go to the obvious solution. That's great. When writing, do you come upon the ending, and does it always, because you have followed the progression of the story, as you write it, does the solution come as sort of a, that ending makes sense? Or have you ever been writing and been completely surprised by the way the story turned out? Have you had the rug pulled out from under you?
If I have, I can't remember it at the moment, and I can't point to the book that it happened. There's the whole Chekhov's gun thing, right? If you put the gun on the stage at the beginning of the play, you have to fire it by the end. So there will be things that surprise me where I will find themes that I didn't realize I was weaving a theme into the book, or there will be little pieces, little breadcrumbs that I didn't know I was leaving, that I get to the end of the book and I'm like, oh my God, of course. That's exactly how it should end. It should be this. And I thank the muse. I thank this part of the back of my brain that is putting that in the book. But oftentimes I am surprised because I don't realize how many things I kind of, my subconscious was working on as I was writing, things I didn't notice that until I got to the end. And I often have a piece of paper where I will write things down that's by my computer, where I'll be like, don't forget to pay this off. Don't forget that. Don't forget this. And I'll go through and I'll make sure that I've scratched them out at the end, because these are all the threads, right, that you want to have tied off at the end of a book. You don't want to leave anything undone or unanswered. So I think that's probably the biggest surprise I get, is how many things I'm blessed with to kind of bring together for the climax of the book and the denouement after.
Gotcha. You did an interview with a mutual friend of ours, Jack Carr. I think it was a couple of years ago, and you guys were talking about the revision process. And Jack was talking about how you had helped him through his first novel and gave him some encouragement and some advice. And he finished it and you said, okay, is it the best it could possibly be? And he said, well, let me go back. And he, I think took another season and worked through the book. But then it comes to a point where no matter how much you invest in that book, it might incrementally get better just by minute, points. But at some point, it is what it's going to be. As a writer, how do you know when you've reached that point where it's the best it's going to be for the vast majority of people? How do you know when you've reached that point?
It's funny. I got asked this question at Thriller Fest. No surprise. I got no surprise that'd be a question asked at a big conference of thriller writers. Sure. And I said, it's like catching an in-law right as they're about to fall off a cliff. The real challenge is knowing when to let go. And listen, if you're writing a book a year, that decision often gets made for you. If you're writing your first novel, you have forever to write it, right? Yeah. But anything after your first novel, you're on a deadline if you're under contract and things like that, and your editor's banging down your door for the book. What I said to Jack and why I said it, it's actually based off an old story from the White House, from when Henry Kissinger was in the White House, and he had an aide prepare a report for him, and the aide left it on Dr. Kissinger's desk. And the next morning, the aide came back and there was a Post-it on there that said, you can do better than this. So the aide went back and added some more material, some more footnotes, a couple more tabs, put it back on Dr. Kissinger's desk. Next morning, same thing, another Post-it, you can do better than this. And this cycle repeated itself about 3 or 4 more times. He would drop it at Dr. Kissinger's office and get it back the next morning. You can do better than this. So he finally, like the 5th or 6th time revising it, actually waited till he knew Dr. Kissinger was in his office, and he walked it in and handed it to Henry Kissinger and said, Dr. Kissinger, this is the absolute best I can do. And Henry Kissinger looked at him and said, well, in that case, I'll read it. So that was my thing with Jack Carr a little bit, which is I don't want to see it until you've got it to the point where it is the best you can do. And so he spent time polishing it because he was only going to get one chance to make a great first impression, which he did. He is the most wonderful guy. He's a fabulous author. And I was introducing him to my editor, and I knew he had what it took. And I wanted him to take this great opportunity that he was about to have and knock it out of the park, which is what he did. And, he's so gracious to me. And I said, listen, all I did was crack the door. You kicked it open. You won the day with Emily Bestler. That is more a testament to Jack and his writing ability than it is to me and my ability to get my editor to go to coffee with somebody and read their manuscript. So, it is tough. Once somebody asked Vince Flynn, God rest his soul, if he would ever go back and want to re-edit some of his books. And he said, no, never. It would drive me insane. And I remember having a chat with Vince. It was either I had a chat with Vince, and this did come up, or I read it because Robert Bidnotto, who's also a thriller author, used to write for, I think it was the Ayn Rand magazine, The Objectivist. I think he interviewed Vince for it. And so either Vince said this to me or I read it there, or both. I'm always trying to be careful with where I attribute stuff, and the fog of memory and stuff gets in the way. But I do remember specifically the line from Vince, because I really believe that as an author, I can constantly get better. So I spend a lot of time. This is taking your revision thing a step further. I read a lot about the art of writing because I want to get better with my plot twist, with my character development and things like that. And that question, Vince answered by saying, listen, if you're batting 300 and you know you're going to make it into the Hall of Fame, why would you change up your swing? Why would you start tweaking your swing? And that's Vince. That's great. He's a great writer. Some people are incredibly gifted, and that's just that it doesn't occur to them, and that they have no desire to. That doesn't mean Vince didn't tweak and try but his line was, why mess with your swing if people are happy? Why do it? just the way I was raised by my dad, a Marine, my mom, who was a flight attendant, became an entrepreneur. I always want to be better. Their thing was, if you're going to push a broom, you be the best damn broom pusher there is. And you never take for granted the people that pay you to push that broom. You always want them to feel like, aren't we lucky we've got that guy pushing the broom, because he takes it seriously, does a great job. I take it so seriously, Hank, because you can go out and make another $15 for an ebook, or the $30 for a hardcover. You can go make that money back up. But what you can't make up is the time that you invest in a Brad Thor novel. That's a finite commodity, your time. The time you spend reading one of my novels is time you could spend at work, with your friends, with your family, playing golf, woodworking, whatever your thing is. So if you're entrusting me with your most precious commodity, I want to give you the best I'm capable of. So I'm constantly trying to tweak and all that kind of stuff. And to bring it back around to revisions, I like to revise my stuff. I want it to be as good as it's possible. And my editor has to almost pry it out of my hands to get it, because I'm constantly, and I'm a perfectionist. So I could have 3 years to revise and I'm still going to find things. Oh, this sentence would sound better like this. So you just have to find a point where you're comfortable to let it go, or you're never going to let it go. You could revise for the rest of your life. And that's, we can't do that as writers. If you want to be a working writer, you can't just continually revise.
Yeah. I heard someone say a while back that they don't read series characters because and their reasoning is what really got me, because there is no there are no ultimate stakes at play, because if Scott Harvath can't be killed, because we know next summer we're going to have Harvath book 23, then what, then what good is it? And I thought that was kind of
this isn't your outliner friend who said this, is it?
But I was like, what if everything in life doesn't have these ultimate,
I disagree with this person, Hank. I really do. Look at the success of Indiana Jones. Look at the success of James Bond. Look at the success of the Avengers, right? Right. You are constantly pitting look at the story. Look at the Rocky stories. You're taking likable protagonists. You are pitting them against ostensibly insurmountable odds, and they are achieving. And you want to see that. Maybe somewhere in the back of your mind, but in all fairness, you never know when somebody's going to end a series character. You don't know if this is the last book, that maybe they are going to meet their end. But as long as this is what makes a hero, is someone who is able to win against just incredible odds stacked against them. This is what we love. We love the idea that if they can hit these incredible highs, if they can struggle against this, what looks like an insurmountable obstacle, there is that part of us that we have a certain amount of empathy there, that there is this, if they can do it, I can do it in my life kind of a thing. And I think that's why we like these characters. And it's interesting because I never intended to write a franchise character. I liked the Michael Crichton books growing up, and I loved the idea of being able to have a new protagonist and a new cast of characters with every single book. So when I went to pitch my second book to Emily Bessler, my editor at Simon & Schuster, she was like, whoa, where's Harvath in this? I'm like, it's not a Harvath book. I said, Lions of Lucerne, my first one, that's Harvath. Now we're going to move on. And she goes, you can't do that. She goes, we got such incredible feedback on Harvath. Readers love him. They want to go for another adventure with him. And I'm like, I want to write somebody new. And she said, wait a second, let me ask you. When you have a character that you've enjoyed reading from another thriller author and you pick up their next book and you see it's that same character, aren't you excited about going to take another ride with them, go on another adventure with them? Haven't they become like kind of part of your family? And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. And she goes, even if the story is set somewhere that maybe you'd never want to travel to, don't you want to go just to see how they get out of this one? And I'm like, yeah. So my editor actually was the one that steered me in the direction of making Harvath a franchise character. I had never intended to bring him back, and it's paid off. She was absolutely right. Harvath has been very, very exciting to write over these many years. And the fact that I'm still writing him and fans look forward to a new Harvath book every summer, I think puts I have no idea who said it. That said that the whole thing about franchise characters. I think it just puts the lie to that. I think people love franchise characters. I think they become a member of their family. I know that's the way it is for me as a reader.
Well, and nobody was buying tickets to see Walter Randall in the Temple of Doom,
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Lou Gibson, next door neighbor in the Dial of Destiny. Will Lou make it?
Right.
Adios, Lou.
And isn't that why we read fiction? Because we want the good guys to win. We want to go along the journey and we want to, for there to be hair-raising action and them to barely make it. But we want them to make it. And if you're looking at your fiction because you want to see someone fail and you want to see the hero die at the end, maybe you got bigger problems than
it's like the literary equivalent of a snuff film. I mean, What kind of sick bastard wants to see the good guy get it in the end? Right. I mean, this person needs therapy. Whoever said that, I'm gonna go on record. Whoever said that needs therapy.
Yes.
Heavy therapy.
That's right. We are in the midst right now of some Hollywood strikes, writers and actors both. Yeah. And I know that there, was some potential news for Harvath to come to the screen, and we all want to see that. But this is a unique opportunity, I think, for readers and for writers and publishers right now, because we're not going to get any new entertainment. This late summer, fall is going to be pretty slim, for TV and stuff. So this is a great time for people to dig into a series character. And how do you, when you see lemons like the what's going on in Hollywood, how do you, as a writer, look to make lemonade?
Well, it's a little tough for us because we're at a studio. We have an amazing team, and the last component we were putting in place was a great writer, and we got one of the best in Hollywood, one of the best writers. And so we got everything put together. We got what's called the pitch, and we were ready to go out to everybody you can think of, HBO, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Apple TV. We're all ready to go. And then the writer's strike happened, and we had to stop because the writer is the one, along with the producers, that makes the pitch, that tries to sell the project. And so we had to pause because of the writer's strike. And our writer was Manny Cotto, and Manny had written most of the 24 episodes with Kiefer Sutherland. Manny gets Harvath. He was a Harvath fan. He really, really understood Harvath, understood that world, could write it like nobody else. I mean, it was an absolute home run for us to get Manny. Unfortunately, Manny passed away 2 weeks ago from pancreatic cancer.
I thought I heard that. Oh,
yeah.
Bad news.
It's terrible news. We feel horrible for Manny's wife and his kids and his nieces and nephews and his friends. They are suffering more than we ever will. It's a professional loss for us. Nobody's going to fill Manny's shoes. There is nobody like Manny Cotto, never has been, never will be. But I would have rather, Manny decided he didn't want to do it, and he lived, instead of being in his 60s to being in his early hundreds before he shuffled off his mortal coil. So it's very sad that we lost Manny. So now, we're at a studio, everything's ready to go. Now we don't have Manny. So what we are going to need is another writer who gets Harvath, and as well as Manny did. Hopefully we got a lot of fans in Hollywood. So that's kind of another thing too, is you want to find a great writer, and either they can read really fast or they've been a long time Harvath fan and they understand who he is and that kind of a thing. So, the way the strike rules go, we are not allowed to talk to any writers until the strike is over. So we can't even say, hey, go read, Deadfall, Thor's new book. So as soon as the strike is over, we can talk about maybe hiring you. So we're not allowed to even do that much. So we have to wait for the strike to be completed, and then we can start soliciting writers. So we were in the starting blocks. We were in the starting gate ready to go. Now we're out of the blocks and out of the gate. And, Kentucky Derby, we're back in the paddock, right? We're back in the stall in the paddock, and we've got to wait to come out again. And we'll find somebody. It's sad that Manny's gone. Just a great guy, great story about his family leaving Cuba. He's just an American success story. And again, we'll never replace him. Those shoes will never be filled.
Yeah. probably some of the most terrible writing advice I've ever heard is to write what you know. And, thinking about Deadfall specifically, and then some other stories that you've written, I would imagine that you are not a popular character in Moscow. Have you been to Moscow? Have you been to Russia?
No. I have friends Yeah, no. And in fact, I said on another program the other day, somebody's like, you write so aggressively against the Kremlin and against the Russian government. Are you afraid? And I said, listen, they're never going to waste a minute on me. Right. I said, and Putin can kiss my ass. I do not care. He can kiss it. But no, I'm never going over to Russia. I just think, there'd be a bag of heroin found in my dresser drawer in my hotel room and I'd be locked up. Right. And unlike Brittany Griner, it would be a drug that I did not transport knowingly into the country, or I can't remember what she said. It was hers, but I don't know if she forgot it was in her bag or whatever. Yeah. There's another guy that's been locked up for pot over there. It'd just be too easy to frame me and just, stick me in a gulag and then trade me back at one point. It'd just be so obvious. So no, I have no desire to go. So if I can't go to one of these places, Hank, I want to talk to somebody who operated there. So either you were an intelligence officer. Yeah. Because they paid attention to the details. They'll give you those color items that most people wouldn't notice, but are really cool to read in a book. Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, and that brings me to, because you do bring out those little color, the little bits and pieces. I think some people don't understand what it is to have immersive details in a story. It's not that you need to describe everything that the character sees, hears, smells, but you do need to pick out the little visceral pieces that the reader then subconsciously fills in the rest of the picture themselves. How do you decide what those little details are when you're asking someone, give me kind of the lay of the land? When you, as the writer who's hearing this from someone, how do you pick out the things that are going to be those things that color in?
It's a great question. So I'll tell you where I messed up, and then I'll tell you where I learned something. So 2 examples. Okay. So I was doing Code of Conduct several books back, and I was setting it in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I got networked into a guy military guy, special operations guy who had been over there and had done some stuff there. And so he agreed to a phone call with me, and he said, okay, Thor, what are you looking for? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm looking for some color details. And he's like, this is going to be a very short phone call. You need to ask me specific questions, or I'm not going to be a very direct guy, right? Which you probably want in somebody that has to make split-second decisions, life or death decisions in the field. He was very polite, but direct. Thor, you need to ask me specific questions. I was like, humana. I was doing the old Eddie Murphy making fun of, I think, Lamont Cranston. But I said, okay, just sprung from my head. I'm like, I don't know. Does everybody have the same bicycle over there? It sounded coming out of my mouth like the dumbest question in the world. And the guy paused, and I'm like, it is the dumbest question in the world. He's about to end the phone call. And that didn't happen. He goes, oh my God. He goes, yeah. They all do ride the same bicycle. I'm like, are you serious? He goes, yeah, they all have the same black bicycle, and it's called a Black Mamba. And I'm like, why is it called a Black Mamba? And he said, well, the bike is black, so you get black there. He said, but the tires are such that when they drive down the dirt road, they leave a track that looks like the trail left by the snake, the Black Mamba. Wow. And I was like, oh my God, that's cool. And I put that in the book. And then I heard from people that were like, Thor must have been in the Democratic Republic of Congo because only people who've been there know about this bicycle. So that was a cool thing, talking to people who have been there and noticed the details. The other thing where I learned something, I told you that I like to read books about writing. And in one of those books, over the last couple of years, this is a very new thing I've started doing that I didn't do a lot before, but now I do it. I try not to be too heavy-handed, but it was about scent. So you mentioned smells and how things smell. I never used to really put that in the book unless it was like, the way the smoke smelled or something that was burning because you were burning like old, film negatives or something like that. And there was a scent to that. Now I realize that scent is very powerful, even in written form. And if you can say, like, I have something about this book where Harvath's in an old kind of Russian style, like a dacha, a cottage. And I describe how the scent reminds him of his grandparents' lake house. So scent can be very powerful. So that is a detail thing that I've only learned recently. And I'm 22 books in the Harvath series, 23 books overall into my career. And it was never anything that was at the front of my mind to include. And now it is. So there you go.
It's so funny because scent is one of those things that, and I've really been picking up on this lately, is that you don't need all of the details. You just need a visceral detail. And
right.
And the readers will fill in and attribute all of that to you when it was you provided a small detail, but you gave them a bridge to kind of paint the rest of the picture. It's speaking of details that you included, the challenge and response code words how did that come about?
So there was challenge and response that happened in World War II because there were certain sounds that the Nazis couldn't make. So if you watch, perfect example, if you watch Saving Private Ryan, when American soldiers run up on other American soldiers or Allied soldiers, there was this challenge and response, flash, thunder, because the Germans couldn't say flash or thunder. You put your mind in an Austrian mindset like Schwarzenegger, and you would not hear Schwarzenegger say thunder; it'd say thunder. So that was something that existed in World War II. And as I did the research for Deadfall, I found out that the Ukrainians have a word for a type of bread that they make in the fireplace, a peasant bread, that it has a sound in it that native Russian speakers can't reproduce. And so in the real world, outside my fiction, the Ukrainians challenge people they don't know in and around the battlefield to pronounce that word for Ukrainian peasant bread, and the Russians can't do it. So these are the kind of like little things I dig up in my research to make the book interesting and to really give it that verisimilitude where you're like, wow, okay, I feel like I'm there, sort of a thing.
Yeah. Deadfall is available everywhere now. Go visit your local bookstore, pick up a hardback copy of it. If you don't have a great local bookstore, we'll put links to it in the show notes of this episode. Also, the Audible audiobook is available now. I haven't listened to the audiobook yet, even though it is in my Audible cart now. And this weekend, I'm going to dig into the audio and relive this book all over again. Do you ever listen to your audiobooks, Brad?
I do. Armin Schultz is a Broadway trained actor. He's great. He's been doing him forever. And just a really quick, funny story about the audiobook narrator. Super handsome guy, tall, really handsome. In fact, I've got some new video of him doing the audio version of the book that I'm going to post on social media probably this week. Anyway, so he's an actor. He doesn't just do Broadway plays. He does television commercials. Okay. So I do listen to them. So I know he's the voice of Scott Harvath. So when I hear Harvath, I hear his voice. So I had the TV on in my kitchen and I was scrambling eggs one morning, and all of a sudden Harvath started talking to me, asking me if I knew what level my cholesterol was. And I was like, why is Scott Harvath concerned about my cholesterol? And it took me a second. I'm like, that's coming from the TV. And I looked up and there was Armin Schultz. Army was in a white lab coat standing in front of a mirror in Central Park where people were walking up and seeing their cholesterol numbers reflected in the mirror. So it was for some drug commercial or whatever, but it was very funny. So the answer is yes, I do listen to my audio versions. I love them. And he is a fabulous, fabulous narrator. I love Armin Schultz.
That's hilarious. Yeah. And I love what he does with the character. And there's just something about having these characters come alive. living in the 2020s is an amazing thing. We get to experience the book by reading it, and then we get to have another experience listening to a great actor, portray the book. So,
and by the way, I want to put him in the TV show. That's he's such a great actor that the decisions will be made by the studio and the director and all that kind of stuff. But I would love to just find, like, as an Easter egg for fans of the audiobooks, I want to find a role where he comes and says something, like something funny where only if you listen to the audiobooks would you know who that is. Because I want people to be surprised. Go, oh my God, wait. That's actually Harvath's real voice. So I want to do that as an Easter egg. That's something I'm hoping to do because I'm really trying to be involved in the production. I'm not telling them how to make the stuff. Hollywood does not want the author to tell them how to make it, but they are buying something equivalent to the Marvel universe by getting 22 books from me. So I do want to see if we can, if they'll be amenable to putting in these Easter eggs. And I think by having Army, who's a fabulous actor, come in and do his voice, I think it'd just be another reason for fans to tune in. You know what I mean? That I would take the time to work with the Hollywood people to do some special things just for them, to say thank you for being longtime readers of the series and listeners.
Your website is a great resource for readers. Lots and lots of info there. Where can they find you online to follow along with everything going on?
Thank you. Yeah, we take a lot of pride in putting up behind the scenes stuff about the books. Here's where I got my research. We just put up something with the film and the movies and books that are actually mentioned in Deadfall that some of the characters are reading or watching. And so my website is Brad, B-R-A-D, Thor, Thor.com.
Excellent. Deadfall available everywhere now. Go grab it. Brad, thanks as always.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Hank.
That's our episode for today. There's so much more to come as we talk to authors about the craft of writing, but also the business of publishing. Be sure to subscribe to the Storycraft Cafe podcast in your favorite podcast app so that you never miss an episode. The Storycraft Cafe is made possible by Dabble. Writing a book is challenging. Your writing tool should not be. Dabble is an easy-to-use online writing tool packed with helpful features that allow beginning novelists and published authors to create amazing stories. Visit us at dabblewriter.com and start your free trial today. Thanks for listening.